Very good evening to all of you. Welcome to another YouTube live session with me, Surjit Kakkar. Today we are on lesson number 10 for options trading. And before we move ahead with the session, I'll again add that I started with the options course some time back. The complete options course is going to be absolutely free, and currently we are on lesson number 10. In case you have still not covered the first 9 lessons, the link to the playlist is available in the description for both English as well as the Hindi videos link. You can go through the previous sessions. And yes, if you're liking these sessions, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and share it with your friends, share it with your family. If you have any questions, queries regarding any of the topics which I've covered, you can put it in the comment section. I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. So let's get started with our lesson number 10, which is selecting the correct strike price and the expiry. But before we do that, let's get done with the basic formalities. So like already said, I'm Surjit Kakkar, and let's go through the formalities, which is the disclosure, which talks about the representation, the risk disclosure, risk involved in the market, and also about the copyrights. Now, like I said, we are on lesson number 10. Lesson number 10 is selecting the correct options, strike and expiry, right? So that is what we'll be understanding what strike price we should be selecting when we are planning trades using options, or what expiry we should be selecting. Now, before we do that, let's first recap what kind of positions can we have whenever we are planning a trade using options. Now, whenever we are planning trade using options, the first thing is there are only two kind of options available. One is called as the call option and the other one is called as the put option. Now, in the previous lessons, we talked about that a call is always a positive unit and a put is a negative unit, right? So I hope you people remember that. So we talked about calls are positive units, puts are negative units, and that is what I told you. Always remember this, because if you'll remember this, you will never have confusion what kind of position you are creating. Now, talking about positions, now I can have two kind of positions. I can have a long position or I can have a short position, right? So the first one let's talk about is having a long position. Long means I am buying. So when I am buying, I can buy a call, I can also buy a put, right? So irrespective whether you're buying a call or you're buying a put, you are creating a long position. Right now, when you buy a call, and again, when we are talking about buying is a positive action, right? So buying is positive, selling is negative, right? So always remember that buying is positive, selling is negative. Calls are positive units, puts are negative units. So as long as you remember this, you will never make any mistake with understanding what kind of positions you are having. And plus, another thing you also have to remember is that buying always gives you the right? If you are buying a call, which means you have the right now to buy. If you're buying a put, you have the right to sell, because plus is buy and minus is sell, right? So when you buy a call, so plus is plus, so now you have the right to buy, and plus minus is minus, so now you have the right to sell. So when you buy a call, so the buyer of the call is first long a call. Why? Because you have bought a call, you have a long position, and you have the right to buy. Now, why do we have the right to buy? Because you have done a positive action, which is bought, and you are buying what? You're buying a call, which is again a positive unit. So plus is plus, therefore you have the right to buy, and this is a bullish position, right? Because you have the right to buy, and plus, like I already said, is plus, which is a bullish position. Now, if you talk about puts, right, when you are buying a put, as a buyer of a put, you are long the put, right? Because when you buy, you're opening a long position. So now you're long a put. But what is happening now is you have bought a negative unit. So plus minus is minus, and buying options gives you the right. So now you have the right to sell, right? Because plus minus will become as minus. So now you have the right to sell, and this is basically a bearish position. Why? Because again, plus minus is minus, which basically means it's a bearish position. So again, I'll add, always remember, calls are positive, puts are negative, buying is positive, selling is negative. And whenever you are doing that mathematics, plus is plus minus is minus, buying is always a right, selling is always an obligation. You will never be making mistakes in understanding what kind of position you are creating. Now let's move on to the second step. So again, let me put this here. It's a positive unit, this is a negative unit. Now let's talk about you are selling. Now whenever you are selling options, you again have two choices. You can sell a call or you can sell a put, and selling is negative, right? So again, selling is minus, buying is plus. So when I am selling, right? So when I'm selling means I'm creating a short position, or in other words, we can also say when I'm writing options, right? I'm either writing calls or I'm writing puts, because in options it is technically not called as short. In options it is called as writing, but selling is basically when you're selling first, it's basically a short position. So when you're doing this, what is happening is now you are a seller of a call because you sold a call, and now minus plus is what? Minus plus is minus, and because I told you selling gives you the obligation, buying gives you the oops, buying gives you the right, right. So now you have the obligation, and plus minus is minus. So what obligation you have? Now you have an obligation to sell. And like I already said, plus minus is minus means now you have a bearish position, right? So this is what happens as a seller of a call. You are first short call. Now you also have the obligation to sell. Plus this is a bearish position. And again, now if I'm selling a negative unit, so minus minus will become as plus. So if you look into this, as a seller of a put, first thing you are short a put. Why? Because you have shorted a put means you have written a put or you have a short position. But because minus minus becomes as plus, so now as a seller you will have the obligation to buy because minus minus becomes as plus, and plus basically means you have a bullish position. So always remember, buying is plus, selling is minus, calls are positive, puts are negative. So now you will never be having any confusion what kind of position you are creating, right? But again, when you buy first, you are creating long positions, which can either be call or it can be puts. And when you sell first, you're creating short positions, which can either be calls or it can be puts. Now, since we have now recapped it, now we'll move to the next step. What strikes we should be selecting and what expiries we should be selecting. Now, today, again, when I'm talking about these selection of strikes and the expiry, I'll not be going very in depth. We'll just be touching the surface because to understand it even better, why we are selecting these expiries or why we are selecting these strikes, when we start with the Greeks, that is where you'll start having better understanding of why we are doing this. But let's have a starting point so that we understand how we select the correct strike price and how we select the correct expiry. All right, so let's move ahead. So how do we select the strike of a trade, right? So whenever we are planning trades, now again remember what we are doing in options now is whatever strategies we talked about initially, right? Initially, when I talked about the strategies where you are using options for insurance, where we're using options for uh, collecting rent, where you're selecting, you're using options for free protection, right? All those were not option strategies for making money. Those were option strategies for investors, where using those options to gain some advantage. But when you start using options for planning trades, right, for making money out of options, right, so that is what we are talking about, how to select these strikes of those trades. And in a way, what we are doing is, now example, I'm a demand and supply trader. So what I am doing as a demand and supply trader, if I have a demand zone, what we do as a demand and supply trader, when the prices they come into my zone, we buy stock, right? That is what we do as a demand and supply trader. But in options, now what we are doing is we are substituting stocks with options. So now we are trying to understand that the time when we are substituting stock with options, what strike price I should be selecting and what expiry I should be selecting, right? So that is what we are talking about. So when you are buying options, right? Buying means you're going long. Now, doesn't matter whether you're buying calls or you're buying puts, because you can buy calls, you can buy puts. The rule remains exactly the same. So whenever you are buying options, first, be that a call or be that a put, select units that provides some intrinsic value, right? So we want to buy uh, calls or puts which have some intrinsic value, which means we want to buy something which is in the money. Now, why do we want to do that? Let's understand it. The reason we want to do that is because intrinsic value does not decay, right? That is what we learned in the previous lessons, that intrinsic value will always remain there. It's the time value that decays. So when you are buying something with intrinsic value, you're buying something which is real, right? So we talked about, whenever we talk about your premium is made up of two parts. You have your intrinsic value and you have your time value. So if intrinsic value is not there, then you're purely buying time value, and we know that expiry time value will become zero. So what you are buying, if there is no intrinsic value, is just smoke, right? Which at expiry will be zero. But when you are buying an option which has some intrinsic value, even if time becomes zero, you will still be left with some intrinsic value, right? So that is why whenever we are buying an option, we have to ensure we are buying options which have some real value, and the real value will only be there if it has some intrinsic value, which means we will only be buying options which are in the money having some intrinsic value, right? So that is what we always have to take care of. And we also have to take care of, it should not be too much of intrinsic value, because if it is too much of intrinsic value, you might be paying too much for that particular trade. So we don't even want it to be very expensive, so we want some real value to be there. That is why we are only looking for options which have some intrinsic value. So as we move forward, we'll be discussing what strike price it would be. But yes, the reason we will be selecting such strikes, the logical reason behind that is because we want something which has real value, and that is where I'm putting my money. I don't want to put my money on something which doesn't even have any intrinsic value, because at expiry, time value will always be zero, right? So that's what we do. And whenever you are selling options, right now, selling option means you're going short, or you can say, in other words, you are writing options. So whenever you're writing options, be that calls or be that puts, right? So again, it doesn't matter whether you're selling a call or you're selling a put. So whenever you're going short, we select units with no intrinsic value and that are made of time value only, right? Which means we'll only be taking selecting out of the money strikes. Why? Because when you are selling, the maximum profit you make is the premium you're collecting, right? You will not have more than what you are collecting. So you understand that as an option seller, my maximum profit is the premium which I'm collecting. And if the complete premium is time value, it is good for you, because you know that at expiry, that time value will become zero and I'll have that complete premium to myself. But if it was having some intrinsic value, then you're not getting the 100%, then you're just getting a small portion of it. So that is why whenever we are selling options, we will always be selling out of the money options, which means we want to sell something which does not have any intrinsic value. And the reason for that is that the time value decays, so we are actually selling smoke, right? So whatever we are selling, it's basically just smoke, because at expiry, all out of the money options will be priced as zero, right? So all the options which are out of the money at expiry are at zero. So when you are selling an out of the money option, you're only selling time value, which will become zero at expiry, and that is to your advantage. So this is what you have to remember. While buying, we want to buy something which has intrinsic value, so that we are buying something real. And while selling, we want to sell something which is out of the money, because then we are only selling smoke, and at expiry, that smoke will be zero in value, right? So that is the first consideration whenever we are buying or selling our options. Next, what expiry date I should be selecting? Now, whenever you are buying options, right? So, whenever we buy options, I talked about that options are not one dimensional asset, options are multiple dimensional asset. If you talk about the previous lesson where we talked about synthetic, right? So, that is where I showed you an example that for every day passing, what is happening here? You're losing some money. So, whenever you are buying options, be that a call or be that a put, right? Doesn't matter whether you're buying a call or you're buying a put. So whenever you are buying options, time is always your enemy, because for every one day passing, that option will be losing some value, right? So that is something you have to remember. And at expiry, that value of time will become zero. So the closer we are to expiry, the faster that value will decay. Example, let's say an option is priced at, let's say, 10 rupees, and let's assume that the intrinsic value is 4 rupees, and let's assume the time value is 6 rupees. Now what is going to happen is, if I have, let's assume, 30 days to expiry, so this 6 rupees will become zero in 30 days, which means every day it will not be losing a lot of value, it will be losing a very small value. But let's assume for a minute that when I bought this option, I'm just 2 days away from expiry. Then what is going to happen is that in one day it will straight away lose 3 rupees. Right. So that is why the closer we are to expiry, the faster the time value will get reduced. Now, similarly, if I was buying this option and it still had, let's assume, 90 days to expiry, then probably every day it will just be losing few paces. But compared to if it was just 2 days to expiry, now every day it is losing 3 rupees, which is almost 50% of the value which is gone in just one single day. So that is why whenever we are buying options, we want to ensure that it the time value should not decay very fast, because if it is decaying very fast, whatever money you're making on the direction, you might be losing more than that because of the time value, right? And like I said, once we get into the Greeks, that is where we'll be understanding it in much more depth. But I just tried to explain it to you in a very simplified way, that the closer you are to expiry, the more money you lose because of time passing every day. And the further away you are from expiry, the time value is losing very slowly. So if you talk about the graph of how the time value works, it's something like this. So if this is my uh, time value and this is my expiry, which is my time, then initially it would be something like this. But as we start getting close to expiry, it will, decay very, very fast. So the more time we have, can you see, the less value we are losing, but the closer we are getting to expiry, can you see, the faster we are losing that amount. So this is why whenever we are buying options, we buy units that will decay very slowly, because if they are decaying very fast, you will be losing a lot of money in a very short span of time. And that is why this is our first consideration, that whenever we are buying options, it should decay very slow. And if you talk about, just give me a second. And if you talk about the Indian markets, when it comes to the options, you know that probably the maximum expiry we have available is 3 months, right? So we would prefer, I know that for every script, we'll not be having very good liquidity when it comes to the far month. But yes, if there is good liquidity, then we would prefer to buy at least 90 days. Why? Because the more the time, the lesser would be the time decay. The lesser the time, the faster would be the time decay. So that is what we will always be doing, that if we have good liquidity, we will only be going for options which are 90 days expiry, not very close, right? Because if it is very close, then we are losing that amount very quickly, which might not take care even if it starts going into in my direction. But if we have a lot of time, then the decay of the time is very slow, which will be helpful to us, right? So that is our consideration. And similarly, when we are selling options, now when we are selling options, now this can be a call or this can also be a put, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're selling a call or whether you're selling a put. Now time is always our friend, because the more time is passing by, even if the stock doesn't move in our favor, the time will be reducing the value of that option. So that is why when we are selling options, we will be selecting units that decay as fast as possible, right? So the faster it is decaying, the better it is for us. Again, let me go back to the same example. If the value was 10 and out of this 4 rupees was your intrinsic value and 6 rupees was your time value, if I buy a 90 days option and this was the case, then probably every day I'm losing few paces, maybe 50 paces, 60 paces, 70 paces. But if I am buying, let's say, an option which is expiring, let's say in 5 days, then probably this is going to lose more than 1 rupee every day. That is how in 5 days we'll be getting close to 6 rupees. Now, if I'm buying something which is just 2 days to expiry, so now I know, sorry, selling, not buying, selling, right? So my bad. So we are talking about selling. So if I'm selling something which is 2 days to expiry, then what is going to happen is every day it is going to lose 3 rupees, which is to my advantage, because even if the stock doesn't go in my favor, just keeping it overnight, I'm making 3 rupees, because time will decay and at expiry, time value has to be zero. So that is why when we are selling units, be that call or be that puts, we will always be selling the ones which decay as fast as possible. Therefore, we will never be going beyond 60 days, right? So 60 days is still the higher end. So we will use 60 days as the maximum. The smaller we can use, the better it is for us. But at times what might happen is you might be planning a trade where it might take a little longer time, maybe for the prices to go to your target. That is where, even if you want to extend, maximum can be 60, but yes, I'll say 30 would be the best case scenario, in case you feel that probably within 30 days you might get your target. But yes, if you're talking about the worst case scenario, not more than 60, anything less than 60. So that is what we will be doing. So now we understand what expiry we will be selecting, right? The more the time, the better it is for us when we are buying options. When we are selling options, the lesser the time, the better it is for us. So now we understand how to choose expiry. Plus, we also understood when we are buying, we would always buy something which is in the money. And when we are selling, we would always choose something which is out of the money. But now, how do we select our strike? The strike price, again, I will be telling you this based on demand and supply, but I'll just give you an idea. If you're not using demand and supply, you're using something else, what strikes you can select. So the strike selection will be at or below the demand zone. So if we have a demand zone, we will always be choosing a strike which is below my demand zone, which means below my distal line, or even if it is at the distal line, acceptable. So it has to be at or below in case of demand zone. And in case of supply zones, it has to be at or above, right? So at or above the distal line. So I will be choosing a strike which probably would be above this. So always remember, as a demand and supply trader, whenever we are selecting our strikes, AOB stands for at or below the demand zone, and AOA stands for at or above the supply zone. So now let's look at it as an example. So let's assume for a minute that I was planning some trade, let's say on this supply area. So if I was planning my trade on this supply area, what I would do is, if you look at my distal line, the distal line is 2095. So I will be choosing a strike which will be close to this, right, or above this. So in this case, I can choose 2100 strike. Like here you can see, let me just bring this up for you. That for, let's imagine I wanted to buy a put, right? Let's imagine I wanted to buy a put. So when I'm buying a put, I'll choose this 2100 put because this will be at or above the supply zone. And similarly, if I wanted to go long at this demand area, and you can see here the distal line is 1850, 1.95. So I'll be selecting 1850 or maybe something below it. And you can see we do have 1850 available to us. So 1850 will be at the money, right? Because 1850 is the nearest one. So we can even select that. So I can go for 1850 or one below it, which can be 1840 if you wish to, right? But that is what we will be doing. At demands, it will always be below or at the distal line. At supply, it will always be above or at the distal line. Now, just in case you're not using demand and supply strategy, you're using some other strategy, then what you need to ensure is that whatever is your stop loss, right, it has to be at or above your stop loss. And similarly, in case of, let's say, a long trade, wherever your stop loss will be at or below your stop loss, right? So again, if it is not demand and supply, then at least you'll be having a stop loss, right, which can be some Fibonacci levels, which can be some pivot points, which can be some support and resistance areas, right, whatever it is. So whatever is your stopping point, it will be at or below in case of a long position, and in case of a short position, whatever your stop loss was, it will be at or above that stop loss value. Perfect. So that basically covers today's lesson, which now helps you understand what kind of expiry we select. It also helps you understand what strike price we will be selecting, and why we are doing that. I also helped you understanding it in a very logical way. Like I said, as we move forward with the options Greek, we will be getting more in depth into it. Why we are doing something like this, you'll start having better clarity to it. But yes, today we were just touching the surface and understanding the expiry and the strike selection for the options trade. So thank you so much for joining in again. This is lesson number 10. In case you have still not covered the previous lessons, make sure you do that. And in case you have any questions, queries, feel free to put it in the comment section. I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. And again, thank you so much for joining in. I'll see you again very, very soon, because I'll be doing the same lesson in Hindi as well, probably on Friday. So we'll see you on Friday. Till then, enjoy your evening. Take care. Bye bye.